In today's world, people feel lost in a sea of ideas. Which ones should we accept? Stay tuned because you're listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. Here is your host, Kurt Jarris.
Well, a good day to you, and thanks for joining us here on another episode of Veracity Hill, where we are striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. Very nice to be with you here, episode 125. We're going to be talking about traversing the difficulties of social media and the internet, especially if you have children and you're wondering about how you're able to manage those expectations, some practical tips to do so. But also if you're someone like me who works on the internet, what are some good practical advice, or how can we apply some of the things we find and apply it to our own lives, perhaps? I'm sure at the end of the day, when we're on death's door, we're not wondering, gee, I wish I spent more time on Facebook. So there are probably things we wish we spent more time doing. And so having a bit of self-control and reining things in is probably helpful toward our long-term joy and virtue in our life. But before we get into that, just a couple announcements. If you haven't had the chance to listen to last week's episode yet, The Last Call for Liberty, it was a wonderful interview with Os Guinness, and I've got his book here still on my desk. It was an awesome interview. We asked all sorts of great questions, and he's just an amazing subject to interview, to learn more about his work, his writings, and his life. And we actually have a winner from the giveaway last week, and it's Joe Vasquez. Joe, we've messaged you. We hope to hear from you. Thank you for sharing the video and commenting and engaging with us last week. This week, our guest is Art Bamford. He's a senior fellow at the Center for Media, Religion, and Culture at the University of Colorado, Boulder, or Colorado University. I forget which one it is. Art will correct us here shortly. He's got a bachelor's degree from Calvin College and a master's of divinity from Fuller Theological Seminary. And actually, he and I grew up at the same church, Christ Church of Oak Brook. And although I don't recall we had overlap all that much, but I think he may have with some of my older siblings. So Art, thank you so much for joining us on our program today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, and before I forget, and I'll try to do this a couple times, you are the co-author of this recent publication, Every Parent's Guide to Navigating Our Digital World, and it was put out by the Fuller Youth Institute. Tell us, before we jump into our interview, tell us about the Fuller Youth Institute.
Yeah, it's a kind of a research institute that's connected to Fuller Seminary. And primarily they do a lot of stuff that's for youth ministry people, youth pastors, a lot of different resources for that. And then also some parenting stuff, which is what this book ended up being more on the parent side. But yeah, fulleryouthinstitute.org. They have quite a few blogs and stuff like that. And I still I've written a bunch of blogs for them, and I still try to do that when I can.
Sure. So. Nice. And give me a little bit of background to your interest in media studies.
Yeah. I mean, it goes way back, I would say. And my grandpa, as you know, was a pastor. And I think a lot of he was always really interested in sort of media and communication. So I think a lot of that kind of rubbed off on me. So I studied it in undergrad and then worked in like PR and marketing for a while after college, and then went back and actually originally did a master's that was in media and communication, and then kind of did a pivot to seminary after that, and now in the program that I'm in at CU, which is University of Colorado in Boulder, but they call it CU for short, and I think it's just because the California schools are UC. But yeah, so they actually are one of the few schools that that sort of specializes in media and religion specifically. And so it's, I can combine sort of those two interests, which has been great. So
nice. Yes, you mentioned your grandfather. You're speaking of Arthur de Kreuter. He is the founding pastor of Christ Church of Oak Brook. And yes, I remember when I was a young boy, I would as any young child might do, when it was time for the sermon, I took a nap.
Yep.
So I have good memories of hearing your father's voice. I was too young. I was probably like 5 or 6, But yeah, a lot of good, fond memories of those days back at Christ Church. So
Yeah, I used to have trouble staying awake, and all throughout seminary, I used to joke that that's what happens if you sleep through church when you're a kid. And then someday you end up having to go to seminary.
yeah, you got to relearn all that stuff.
Make up for the lost time. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, so you've mentioned briefly about how the book itself is the product of research and efforts from the Fuller Youth Institute. And so what was the interest there in looking at social media and the internet, and especially being able to help parents with practical tips and advice and reasons why their children might be behaving a certain way? Well, tell me the story behind that.
Yeah, well, it was actually really interesting because when I did my master's, it was my advisor was Lynn Schofield Clark, and she's done a lot of stuff on parenting and families and how they deal with media kind of in the home. And I was her research assistant for that, but my own research was on something totally different. And when I got to Fuller, I wasn't terribly interested in working with Fuller Youth Institute because I didn't have any youth ministry background. And a lot of my classmates did, and so I thought, well, they're not going to want to work with a guy like me, that type of thing. And a friend of mine worked for FYI, and at one point, they asked him to write a blog about social media or something, and he was kind of struggling with it and started talking to me, and I said, oh, well, you could borrow Lynn's book and blah, blah, blah. And then he ended up telling me that they were going to post something. This was like on a Friday that we were talking, and he said, we're posting something Monday that they're looking to hire somebody specifically to work on social media, digital media questions, because they were getting like tons of questions from youth pastors and parents that were on that topic. So I ended up getting that gig. And yeah, it was just, they had a lot of people that were reaching out with questions, and what I love about FYI, one of their sort of mantras is that they turn research into resources. So really just taking the best contemporary research and then translating it into something that's more useful for people. And so it was cool because I had been a research assistant, with Lynn for 3 years or something. But it felt like I was just taking a lot of that work and that research that I had done and then just sort of saying, kind of explaining it in plain English so that parents and youth pastors could actually get something from it. So
yeah, that's definitely an excellent mission to take the facts and to be able to apply it. I know being in academia, some people frequently ask me, and especially my uncle who's a pastor. He says, "Well, what does your research have to do? How are you going to help people in the church?" And so then I have to explain how it's all connected and that there is application.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's part of the challenge, because if we're not doing that, if we're just doing this high level stuff and the research, but what good is it if we're not helping people to use what they know to, say, better their situations, to live more fulfilling, flourishing lives. So yeah, great. Okay, so let's jump in. And you've really, the way that the book is laid out is you've got questions for each chapter, and it's what I really like, and I don't do this with most of the books that we receive because of just time's sake. For starters, the book is very, you see how thin it is, and that's an advantage. Okay, that means it's very accessible. You can sit down and read it. So I've actually read about halfway through the book, like reading, and so it's great to hear the testimonies and the interviews that you did. And so you've got these questions. You've really geared this towards parents that are kind of like in a state of, what do I do? My kid's on their phone, so many hours a day. How can I set up structures? Or like maybe for parents where their kid's about to enter that stage, what should I do? What should the expectations be? So you've set it up very nicely with these questions. So let me just start you off here asking about the first chapter and about managing those expectations. Why is it important to realize what are the goals that a parent might have when they're beginning to set the boundary rules?
Yeah, well, it's I'm trying to remember if this is the first chapter or the second chapter. But I do know one of the big things that we wanted to address was this idea of screen time, because that's used so commonly by parents, and it's in a lot of the parenting literature that's out there. And it really, what a lot of researchers have kind of identified with that is that it's a kind of a carryover to some extent from the stuff that older adults heard their parents talk about with television. And with television, it's very clear cut. You're going to watch, I remember growing up, like I could watch Saturday Night Live up through the first sketch, and then I had to go to bed so I wouldn't sleep through church again the next day. But it was like, you watch an hour after school, you watch a 30-minute show. It's very kind of clear cut. This is what screen time looks like. So one of the things that we try to kind of get parents to think about a little bit is that it's just not that clear cut with digital media. And so when you start trying to kind of count the minutes, count the hours of screen time, it ends up, just sort of drives you nuts. And some of it too is like homework, with like high school kids, a lot of their homework is online or they're using the internet to do it or whatever. So that was kind of the other part is like, it's not all entertainment. It's, there's all these different ways that they're using it. So yeah, I mean, kind of trying to get parents to think about that. And then what we talk about is sort of like creating rituals and routines, because that's one of the big differences between older types of media like TV, film, radio,
right,
versus digital is that with the older stuff, there was a very intuitive sense of, there was a schedule and there's the 10 o'clock news comes out at 10, so it's very kind of ritualistic, just, by virtue of kind of the media itself. And with digital, that is totally out the window. So instead of kind of being all, we're going to count the screen time, we say, just think about more like rituals, routines, and those change too, kind of throughout life. So your bedtime might get later as you get older. And in the same way, your screen time might change as you get older and theoretically more responsible. So.
You talk about, and I can't remember if you use this terminology, but I thought of it, how it applies, sort of a sacred space that, this is a room, say like the family room. If you're in the family room and there's the TV, right, which was the place of entertainment for us, smartphones, that changes everything. But there's this sacred space. And so I recall reading one story where the parent had their child place the phone on a desk or table in that room, so they couldn't be on it while they were, sitting on a couch or something like that. And so setting up those boundaries, not just time, but space boundaries, can really be beneficial toward, that family atmosphere that people are trying to cultivate. Having smartphones has really changed the entire game, because you go from what we grew up with. You had these designated areas, the rooms. The TV was in one room. You write about newspapers, sort of stayed like in one area, if it was like a kitchen area or something like that. And people wouldn't take their newspapers up to their bedroom, to read. There was a designated area. But with smartphones, we've got all this stuff now at our fingertips, in our pockets, and it goes with us wherever we want.
Yeah.
It creates this new challenge for us. And for some parents, this challenge happens maybe unexpectedly. Like it came out of left field. I see here, I've got some quotes up here from the book. You guys must have done various sorts of interviews with countless people in order to get this information. But these are interviews with children. Of course, you just give their gender and their age. And some of the things that they saw when they were online, and I'm not sure if this was just on a computer or on a phone. Here's what some of these children said. They said that one of the things that they might have an experience is of a proposition to meet a person that they don't know. And that's from a boy age 12. Girl age 10. One time I was looking for a game and rude pictures came on the computer. People without clothes on. That's a 10-year-old girl. 10-year-old boy, he would get pop-up things where you have to buy something, and that was something that he didn't really like. So for some parents, they might not be prepared. This might happen unexpectedly. It's a very young age. And you mentioned social media sort of has an age limit from which a person can create a user account. 13, I think, was the age, and so
Supposed to be 13.
Supposed to be 13, right? Yeah, good. I guess
made it for the kid, then the rules are out the window. So it's not a, like a strictly regulated type of thing. So it's up to the parents to kind of stick to that. But yeah.
Right. And of course, I guess if a kid really wanted to get on, they could lie about the year they were born. And so it's really, yeah, I mean, this is like uncharted territory. And we've been here for a few years at least now. With even the development of smartphones and different cooler social media apps, say like Snapchat. I remember when Snapchat got started, it kind of went up and then it got a little lame, but then the younger folks started using it and it started just growing. So for parents, they're really they're surprised and they don't know what to do, and And again, I've usually thought, hey, maybe I've got to figure out how this might apply to me as well, some of your findings, your discoveries. So for parents, what are some of these things they should be looking for? Let's say that they've got an 11-year-old kid who's asking for a smartphone. What are some questions they need to ask themselves about should they get them just a regular phone, a flip phone, or a smartphone, and what are some boundaries that they should employ? What were some of your findings that you discovered for people that have been through this process?
Yeah, well, the quotes that you read from the kids actually reminded me, one of the interesting things is that some of those same kids won't talk with their parents about some of that stuff. So they encounter things that make them uncomfortable or confused or whatever online. But they know their parents are anxious about them having a device in the first place. They know that there's this chance, that it's going to get them in trouble, or, worst case scenario, the parent's going to take the device away from the kid. So that's one of the things we talk about, is just making sure that it's like, if the kids bring you something like that and say, look at, what I'm seeing or whatever, that the kid doesn't get blamed for that, and to try to keep some of the sort of lines of communication open. So that it doesn't turn, because a lot of the young people that we've talked to and other researchers have talked to, have said that there's kids don't share a lot of their negative sort of experiences because they don't want to lose their devices, even though they're having these occasional, bad encounters or whatever. Overall, they'd rather not have to forfeit, the phone or whatever.
So to one extent, when parents are deciding to let their kids have a smartphone, they're getting hooked pretty quickly, and you've discovered maybe some reasons for why this is, why kids spend so much time on screen time. I like the analogy of the lunchroom. I thought that was a brilliant analogy. So tell us about that.
Yeah, well, it was fun to kind of try and think of a way to explain that, but it's basically with adolescents in particular, they're going through their sort of identity formation process. So they're kind of, when you're a kid, your whole identity is just rooted in your family. So you think, I'm so-and-so's son and I'm so-and-so's brother. And, and you don't really think about who am I, what's my place in the world, that kind of stuff. But in adolescence, you start to kind of differentiate yourself and figure out how you're your own person apart from the family. And so social media and digital media in general has become a really big part of that. And stuff like Snapchat, Instagram, all of those kinds of things, it's part of that. But it's a lot of, and the lunchroom thing, what we were trying to get across is that a lot of it's intuitive. So kids can't explain, when the parents, and a lot of parents I interviewed were like, my daughter just goes on Instagram and she's just likes everything. She doesn't even look at the pictures and she's just liking everything. And it's like, that's, it's like wearing certain clothes or sitting at a certain table with certain kids. You know what I mean? It's just about kind of being in this environment or this space with other kids and what you're projecting and kind of who you're hanging out with and all that kind of stuff. So it's a lot of the disagreements I feel like with parents and adolescents are, the parents are like, why do you go on Instagram and just like stuff? Or why do you have a snap streak? that's been going for 400 days with your friend. And it's like, it doesn't, and we're thinking there's some kind of like substantive sort of communication or relationship building or something that's going on. And it's like, it's just the school lunchroom. They're kind of just intuitively trying to find their place in all of it.
Why did you wear the color purple today? Why'd you wear that shirt?
Yeah. Why'd you dye your hair blue? And exactly.
But understanding that, though, can be so helpful for parents because, yeah, they're not going to get so upset with, or maybe as upset with why their child might be acting a certain way. It's because this is the way that kids are relating. And that's in a sense, that's to make a neutral statement. And whether there are pros or cons to that is still kind of, up for grabs. It's up in the air. Certainly there are some downsides. There's viral bullying. But I know, again, in reading one of your stories, there was a parent who got their child a smartphone, and their child would like only certain types of posts, I think maybe about comics or something like that. And so the parent was able to use the digital world to find another way or a better way or just a way to relate to their kid because they discovered their kid liked the comments. So then they had something to talk about. So there are pros and cons here.
Yeah, for sure. And there was another dad that I talked to, and I think it was his daughter, but he actually noticed from kind of checking up on what she was liking on Instagram or whatever, but kind of noticed that there had been a change in what she was doing on social media and talked to her about it and found out that his daughter was actually pretty depressed and they weren't seeing that as much over dinner, like in real life, they weren't picking up on it, but he kind of saw the patterns change enough with social media to catch it, which is kind of interesting.
Huh. All right, so one of the things I like about the book, you mentioned taking that knowledge and making it relevant. You've got these discussion questions at the end of each chapter, and so you've really laid out the book to serve, maybe a small group setting, a parents group, where they can come together. What was that sort of the strategy behind the discussion questions aspect?
Yeah, and it's funny because where there isn't as much sort of talk about faith and theology and that type of thing in the book.
Right.
If you're thinking it's from Fuller Seminary, there might be these long, discussions around that. And there isn't quite as much of that type of stuff, but that was part of our thinking, as an evangelical seminary, that we thought this is a topic that parents want to talk about. It's a great thing for a church to, lead a small group around it or something like that, or for parents to do like a book club. And talk about it. And so, yeah. And one of the points, too, that we get to near the end of the book is that, and this was something I thought was really interesting when I was doing interviews and stuff, is how with parents, the way parents are using it, and I don't know if there's something comparable to the school lunchroom, but I'll think about it. But it's really competitive. So parents are wanting to show off and put, look at how our kids are so immaculate.
We're doing the same stuff the teens are doing.
Yeah, it's the adult version of what kids are doing, basically. But the difference that was so funny is that the kids are all collaborating to get to work around the parents. So if the parents all have a content filter and one kid figures out how to sort of like jailbreak to get through the content filter, he tells all of his friends at school how to do it. And with the parents, they're trying to answer all these questions and wrestle with all this stuff. And they don't talk honestly with each other about what they're struggling with. It's all just, look at our nice family photos or whatever. And so that was another thing that we really recognized was that parents need to, they can't compete with the kids. If the kids are being super collaborative to work around their rules, then if they want to stand a chance, they need to work with each other a little bit more as well. So.
Yeah, so parents have to come together and say, hey, here's what we're doing. Are you able to, do something like that? Or you talk about how having sort of like it's a community experience almost. Because like you said, you've got kids that are sort of rerouting around the rules and that's causing a problem. Or like if their neighbor or their friend or something is, if his parents, it's like total freedom, but you've got these boundaries, there's going to be some difficulties there. So it's definitely a community experience in helping other families to be accountable and to help them to accomplish their goals.
Yeah.
So
And even on a tech standpoint too, the one parent that I talked to worked in IT, and he was like an IT professional. And he started explaining all this stuff to me about how he had different routers, and he did all this stuff to so the kids couldn't get Wi-Fi in their bedroom, but they could get it in the kitchen. And I didn't understand any of what he was saying, but I remember when I interviewed him, I thought, if I ever have kids, I got to make sure I'm friends with an IT guy. Because he knew how to do all this stuff. And then, so there's a kind of a technical level too, where parents might have a friend who knows how to, set up some of that kind of stuff that somebody like me wouldn't have a clue how to do it.
Yeah,
so.
I think it's Disney that's come out with something you attach to your router where you can, shut off the internet or only for select users. Maybe it might be for certain devices during certain times. So that's an option. So there are products that are adapting to the needs of at least some consumers.
Yeah.
You use terminology in the book, digital native and digital immigrant. Tell us about those two different terms.
Yeah, it's there's a book that's probably have it sitting right behind me.
I see your Kierkegaard book there, the striped red one.
Yeah, I've got a
bobblehead of John Calvin.
John Calvin bobblehead here, which is a real staple. Anyway, there's a book that's called Born Digital, and I can't remember the authors off the top of my head, but it was kind of a terminology that they came up with, and the idea is if you're an immigrant, and I actually used the example of one of my own grandparents, my Grandpa Bamford, in the book, because he came to the U.S. when he was like 2 years old, but still, in his 80s, before he passed away, would have a cup of tea every afternoon, had a little bit of an English accent that he got from his parents. You know what I mean? Like even though he had spent 80 something years in the U.S., there was still a little bit of British,
sure,
kind of residually. And so that's sort of the idea, is that we're at a point right now where there's, digital immigrants. Like I'm a digital immigrant, where I still remember kind of a pre-digital world, but the younger sort of generation right now doesn't. And it's amazing because I'm teaching at CU, and my students, we talk about some of like what's different between, electronic media and digital media. And they're like, the electronic stuff is like ancient history. It's like, might as well talk about the Civil War or something.
So what would be the line? Would it be something like if you ever had to log onto the internet, hearing that AOL sound, the dial-up, would you then be an immigrant to the digital world? Is that sort of where the line is?
It's hard to say because it's not, because I think like smartphones were a really big game changer. So I think the generation where, they're using mom and dad's smartphones as little kids, that's very different from my kind of early childhood. But it's probably, I don't know.
Somewhere around there.
Around like 20, I would guess, maybe 20 years old.
Yeah. I know there are parents that they've loaded. This is kind of awful. And it just, it's a whole new world here. There parents that have uploaded videos of their babies holding a magazine, okay, a paper magazine, and the baby is trying to, swipe and try to get the magazine to do something.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, it's funny, too, because I actually spoke at a thing that was in Silicon Valley. It was a church thing. And one of the parents that was there worked in tech, for like an app developer or something. And he said that they actually have like 3 and 4 year old kids. And some of the people who work there bring their own kids in or whatever. But they have like 3-year-olds do product tests on the apps that they're developing, many of which are for adults. But the thinking is if it's easy enough that a 3-year-old can use it, then we're good. Like nobody's going to bother our customer service people if it's, if a 3-year-old, if it's intuitive enough for a 3-year-old. So it kind of weirdly is working both ways. Yeah.
What are some, I'll ask this question, then we'll head to a short break after you answer. So one of the questions that parents had was, what are some practical tips for keeping the family together? So from preventing digital media from separating people, isolating them in their own digital worlds. What were some of the practical tips you guys discovered?
Yeah, well, I mean, the kind of the time and space boundary stuff that I mentioned earlier, kind of having some rituals and routines around all of that, not only in like the day-to-day, but then also with vacations and kind of figuring out, what that's going to look like. Are we going to be constantly taking pictures and on social media while our family's on vacation, or are we not? So I think figuring a lot of that stuff out is probably good. I'm trying to think of what some of the other ones were.
And it might not be necessarily getting rid of digital media, but it might be utilizing digital media. So like, watching Netflix together, watching a Netflix show, if it's appropriate.
Yeah. I did a study at CU. We were looking at Netflix and talking to students about binge watching. Some of which was very scary, the amount of binge watching that's going on with college students. But there were a few that said that they had these kind of like pre-planned binge watches with siblings who were at other schools and with parents, and they would be like texting. So they'd say, let's watch such and such a show together. And they'd be texting each other while they're watching it.
They wouldn't even be together, though, but they would have coordinated, hey, let's watch the first episode right now.
Yeah.
Huh.
Which is amazing. I mean, it's cool, because it's with some of them, it was like they started watching it in high school and they'd sit with their parents and actually watch the show. So now they're in college and it's like, they're just texting and kind of watching it at the same time, which is, so there's cool opportunities like that to actually build more connection, I think, as well.
Yeah. Nice. Good. All right. Well, we've got to take a short break here. When we come back, we'll continue our discussion with Art Bamford. He's a senior fellow at the Center for Media, Religion, and Culture at CU Boulder in Colorado. And we're talking about navigating our digital world and the traversing the difficulties of managing social media and the internet and how we can use it to our benefit and other ways we might have to restrain ourselves. So stick with us through this short break from our sponsors.
You're listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society.
Evangelical Christians are talking about hell. What if we believe what we believe because we've always believed it? What if the gospel is really a matter of life and death? We want you to open your mind, open your Bible, and rethink hell. At rethinkinghell.com, evangelicals look at what the Bible says about hell, putting conventional and controversial views to the test.
Have you heard of the Google Ad Grant for nonprofits? 501c3 nonprofit organizations can receive $10,000 per month in online advertising credit from Google, empowering you to share your message with the world. At Defenders Media, we partnered with Nonprofit Megaphone, an agency focused solely on Google Grant acquisition and management. They got us approved for the grant and now manage ad campaigns, bringing hundreds of new people to our websites each month. If you are eligible, Nonprofit Megaphone will acquire and manage the grant for you for a month for free to see if they can help you too. Visit nonprofitmegaphone.com to learn more. Thanks for sticking with us through that short break from our sponsors. If you'd like to learn how you can become a sponsor, you can go to our website, veracityhill.com, and click on that Patron tab. Patrons are also folks that just chip in a few bucks a month to help our program continue and to grow, and we would love to get your monthly support. We are presently exploring the opportunity to air our program in a small radio market. Chicago's a bit too pricey for us, but we figured if we should get on the radio, we should get on some market and use that to expand our reach and our ministry work. So we'd love to get your support in doing that. All right, we're talking about social media and the internet and how it affects our lives, our family lives. certain tips and advice parents can have and utilize for their purposes in cultivating a healthy family life. And we are joined today by Art Bamford, a senior fellow at the Center for Media, Religion, and Culture at the University of Colorado Boulder. And Art, you've got some interesting research areas. Let me just read this off here from your bio. So, of course, you're interested in media and religion. Media ecology. I haven't thought of that before, but sort of the ecosystem of media and how that all plays out. Rhetoric and music history. For your master's thesis, you used media ecology theoretical framework to compare the evolution of the written word or text from orality to literacy to the development of recorded music in the late 1960s and 70s. Boy, that's a niche.
Yeah.
But that's
real practical application with that one.
So tell me about that. That alone interests me. What is that about? Let's put it in layman's terms.
Yeah. Boy, see if I can remember it now. So the media ecology thing is kind of like you said. It's thinking about all the different media that people have at their disposal and how they sort of communicate using all those things. And there's a scholar named Walter Ong who wrote quite a bit about kind of the emergence of print, and after the print revolution, kind of around the time of the Reformation, that it changed a lot about society, that it had a lot of kind of far-reaching effects. And one of the things he talked about was the ways in which people actually write, and sort of the process of being an author, that it sort of changed authorship, because you thought about this sort of big mass audience that was out there, and it kind of changed the types of things people wrote and that sort of thing. And so I compared that to a couple of particular things, so like multi-track recording, the synthesizer, and the drum machine. But looked at how it's really interesting in this late 60s to early 70s period. Previously you had where a band that was out playing live, performing live, they would go into the studio and basically just play it live and record it. But you start to get this evolution where it's like a solo artist locks himself in the studio for 2 years, lays down all these different parts, overdubs his voice, all that kind of stuff. And I felt like there were a lot of similarities between kind of that shift and the stuff that Walter Ong talked about.
Huh. And your PhD work focuses on revival movements and North American broadcasting.
Yeah. Yeah. It's specifically like advertising and marketing and PR. And it's been really interesting to research it, but the kind of, there's this evolution of how people thought about and sort of talked about conversion and persuasion, and how do you convince somebody to change their lifestyle, to change their mind.
Yeah.
The idea of Christian perfectionism, where you're constantly sort of striving to better yourself, that becomes popular at a certain point. And you really see, in like advertising, PR, marketing as, a profession, as an industry, that's kind of born in the U.S., that's created in the U.S. But I'm seeing, hopefully, since I'm still writing the thing, I'm seeing kind of overlap and some interesting connections between sort of those, discussions about conversion and persuasion.
Yeah. Nice. Very relevant, especially to our nonprofit Defenders Media. We help apologetic ministries to increase, the visual appearance of the message. So yeah,
and revival. Look at you.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Hey, so you're a first-time guest on our program, and I didn't tell you about this, and you'll find out here. We do a segment of the show called Rapid Questions. It's cool. He's worried now. So we've got 60 seconds here. We do a little game clock. You won't hear the game clock, but we ask just sort of strange questions out there, and we're looking for short responses. So if you are ready, I will start the game
I've been
clock.
in grad school too long for short responses. But.
Oh, this is really fun to, in doing this program now for over 2 years. We get people that are super fast, and we get some of the very heady academics who take, 20 to 30 seconds on one question. So it's really fun, and we get to know people a little bit more too. So, all right, are you ready?
Sure.
All right, here we go. What's your clothing store of choice?
J. Crew.
Taco Bell or KFC?
Oh boy, starved to death.
Oh, do you drink Dr. Pepper?
No.
If you were a baseball pitch, which one would you be?
Curveball.
Have you ever had to wear a uniform to school?
No.
What's the farthest away place you've ever been?
Probably Seoul, South Korea.
What's the last show that you binged watched?
Oh boy, probably Daredevil. Netflix Daredevil.
What time do you get up in the morning?
Around 5, actually.
If
Pretty
you
early.
could go anywhere in the world on vacation, where would you go?
Switzerland.
Last one. Are you a good cook?
No. Definitely not.
Great. Okay, so you'd like to go to Switzerland.
Yeah.
You've just
That might be because I have John Calvin over my shoulder here, but
you want to go to Calvin's Geneva.
yeah. Well, it's funny because I went to Germany last year, I guess, for a Reformation thing, and it was we were in Wittenberg, and I wanted to try to get to Switzerland just because I was in that neck of the woods, but it was too far. You know what I mean? I didn't want to spend 3 days on a train getting there and everything.
Yeah.
But there's part of me, I'm still sort of kicking myself. So.
Yeah, well, hopefully you'll have the opportunity to get over there. And maybe, as you know, once you can pay to get over there, it's pretty cheap financially, at least, to get around.
Yeah, and I was hoping to kind of make a short day trip of it, and then I thought Switzerland probably deserves more than a day. So.
Yeah, nice. Okay, so we're getting back to the segment, the topic for today's program. We're talking about social media, the internet, and traversing those difficulties that we perhaps have with our children, we anticipate having with our children, or maybe we ourselves deal with. I know it's sort of a struggle for me. Sometimes, I already do work on the internet. I'm communicating with some of our workers at Defenders Media. I'm on social media. Sometimes I think I should just give it up. There are some days like that, but then other days you see the benefit to it. Art, what's been your experience studying social media? I know that I read articles maybe once a year that talk about usage in social media sort of leads to depression among people. Is that stuff you've discovered yourself, and what's your take on being on social media?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, and I think that this was more with young people, but there was one study that I thought it was very interesting because they found that the two groups that used social media the most, it was people that were depressed and people that were really happy. And the people that were really happy, they were connecting and they were sharing all this stuff and it was great. But then it's this sort of huge bell curve where it's like those are the heaviest users, either really happy or really depressed. Which I always thought was sort of interesting. But yeah, when you mentioned Snapchat earlier, it's funny because that was my first experience where I looked at it and I was like, I don't need to do this. I don't need to be a part of this. I have, enough accounts and passwords and stuff out there. But I'm sort of an enthusiastic, user. I think the ability to keep in touch with people has been amazing. A lot of my best friends are from high school, and we're all over the world now, and we still are texting each other stupid jokes. Clearly, but more recently, I'm having a lot of sort of issues with Facebook in particular, because there's been some sort of alarming stuff that's gone on around them in terms of how people are using the platform, and I don't get the feeling that they care very much. That some of it's going on, and and there was an article posted recently, and it was like 15 instances of Mark Zuckerberg apologizing and saying they were going to fix something and then not fixing it. And it was like year after year, these congressional hearings and say, we're really sorry about X, Y, Z. And then they have no sort of accountability.
Yeah.
And that's been, and it's hard because, like I said, I have a lot of relationships that I'm more or less maintaining through that platform. So I don't know that I'm at the point of completely canceling my account. But I feel like I have been a lot more kind of like, I'm going to check Facebook maybe like once a month kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Rather than every day. So.
Yeah. It seems like, especially in the growing age of social media censorship, some people are becoming weary of, hey, what material is going to be out there or not out there? Do I put all this effort into, say, having a page or a group? And what if Facebook, the powers that be, just decides to nix it because one person reported or something like that? I know I've actually was a part of a group, the Christian Apologetics Alliance, which was a very flourishing group. And just one day, it was gone. And so people had to restart it. But, you're talking, searchable threads, topics that no longer existed. And it's almost like these are just massive companies that it can be extremely hard to reach someone there, too, to find an answer. The customer service isn't the best. So those are some concerns.
The one analogy that I like to use with Facebook, and this is one of my big hangups too, is that they always say that the solution to all of these things is they're gonna code it, right? They're gonna improve the algorithm and it's gonna do a better job of sorting and filtering everything. But they have hardly any employees, and they've got over 2 billion users. And so I did a little bit of math at one point, and it's basically comparable to if the city of Chicago, which has 3 million people living in it, if they had 25 police officers for all of Chicago. That's the ratio of employees at Facebook versus users.
Wow.
And you look at the kind of money they're making. I mean, they're making an extraordinary amount of money, and they just don't want to spend money to hire employees. And they're saying, well, we'll just code it. We can just figure out, we'll improve the algorithm. And it's like, hire some people, especially with some of the stuff that's going on, and globally there's been a lot more extreme kind of political stuff than we've even seen in the U.S. And they're just, like I said, it's, Zuckerberg every couple months pops out and says, well, sorry, we'll fix it. It's like, really? Mark,
Yeah,
so.
there are market demands, which might be in their interest to make, but there might be a minority of demands which is not in their interest to make. And so some people might remain on the platform. It might be hard to move to a different platform because people are already so connected. They're so integrated into the system that it's become a part of our life. You wake up, you check Facebook, So there are some downsides. There are some upsides, though, too. So here's a quote I found from Tessa, mom of two, from your interviews. She writes here, or said, I'm not sure if you transcribed them, but at any rate, here's what she said. I shared with them what the school sent home about Snapchat and how it was all about sexting. And they got to drive an honest conversation about it. In my family, tech tutorials have become a place where all of us feel safe to talk, share, teach, and in my case, learn. I get to keep up with them because they're bringing me along. So in this home, Tessa discovered that she was able to have a good, serious conversation about important topics. It provided that platform for doing so without maybe making it awkward or not having that conversation at all. So some of the important conversations of life can be brought up as a result of social media usage.
Yeah, and with kids too, we find a lot because it's one of the few areas where the parents or the grandparents will say, "Can you teach me how to do something?" And that so often is the kids are in that position asking the parents, "Can you help me with this? Can you teach me how to do something?" So kids really love it when parents say, "You're the expert, explain Snapchat to me," or whatever it might be. And so that was one of the kind of pieces of advice in the book is, look for, any opportunity to let a kid be the expert and actually teach an adult how to do something. They love it. So
Yeah,
make use of those.
getting them involved is definitely important. So some parents might be concerned if they give their teenager, a smartphone. How are they able to, without being, big brother, how are they able to supervise and maybe in some cases censor things that are happening on their child's smartphone?
Yeah, it's definitely not easy. That's a cop out answer, but I think which apps kids are able to have is a big part of it. And we have a kind of a form, and I know it's on the website, and it might be in the book too. I don't remember exactly. But basically, like a permission form. If a kid wants to download an app, it's like a one-page deal, and it says why do you want it, what kind of information are you going to share, what type of information is the app collecting from you, and basically to try to get young people to actually think about what they're getting themselves into with some of these things, which most adults don't think about it. So we haven't set a great example there, but yeah, I mean, I think kind of being very picky about which apps they're using. A lot of the parents that I interviewed said that they would periodically sit down with kids and just kind of say, look through some of the texts. And a lot of it, I mean, it depends on the age and stuff too. That it gets to a certain age where, and there are other scholars who have found that it's real interesting. It's almost like training wheels, where you got to know kind of the right moment when to take them off, because kids will. It does get into that like Big Brother kind of territory at a certain age, but yeah, I mean, I think. Not only monitoring it and kind of keeping an eye on what young people are doing, but then also helping them kind of think through it is a big part of it. Because then then it's more comfortable to just kind of let them run with it on their own. If you feel like they have some, kind of critical discernment skills for how they're using stuff. So
children want to feel trusted, like their parents trust them, and having sort of a contract, if you will, can be a good way to set up and manage expectations and to have and hold your child accountable to the things they agree with. So that way, if something does happen outside of that, the parent can come back and say, hey, look, this is what you agreed to, this is what we agreed to, and say, maybe you've gone against that, and so here are the consequences.
Yeah, well, and my co-authors, Brad and Kara, what they loved about when we were developing that, they were saying the biggest thing a lot of times was they'd be like in a meeting or something, and their kid was at school at lunch talking to their friends, and they would text and say, can I download, such and such an app? And they'd kind of glance at their phone, and they're like, I've never even heard of this app. Like they didn't know anything about it. And so what they love about it is that on this form that we created, it says that the parents get 24 hours to decide, to look into it, decide whether they want to download it or not. And so they said that's the best part is that it buys you 24 hours. So the parents can go to the App Store and look at the reviews and like figure out, what they're getting into exactly.
In terms of raising good digital citizens, which is the title of one of your chapters, you've got a number of really great tips here, and I just want to list a few of them. Authenticity, empathy, you've got here, and some great images too, by the way, here. Not being anonymous, I know, is part of it. That one really struck out to me because doing apologetics ministry online, if I'm, say, on social media and I'm engaging in a discussion with someone, say someone who doesn't have a profile picture of themselves, or someone who doesn't have any pictures of themselves, I'm gonna act a different way, because what that tells me is that the person doesn't want to even have a perception of being accountable, because there's no way to track that person down. You might not know where that person lives. You might not have a set of mutual friends. So while I still want to be winsome, I might be a bit more short with the person, because there are plenty, especially there are plenty of people out there. There are atheists, a lot of atheists out there that can be like this on the internet. There are Christians, unfortunately, that are out there like this. They will say things online that are totally, inappropriate, disrespectful, insulting, and it's definitely not the way you want to engage with people. And so when you're not anonymous, there's that greater sense of accountability. One of the things I tell people is just speak as if, write online as if you're speaking to them in person. Don't say something you wouldn't say to them otherwise, because then that's how they might get offended. Some of our listeners might be hearing what appears to be the sound of a leaf blower. Chris, is that a leaf blower?
Maybe a snow blower?
I don't even know if that's a snow blower.
I don't know.
It's just a high. It sounds like a leaf blower.
We got a lot of snow and rain right now.
We do have a lot of snow and
no
rain
leaves,
right now.
Though.
Yeah. I thought it was going away.
No,
Man, false alarm. Yeah. Sorry about that, Art. We've got our office here in downtown West Chicago, and we get all sorts of sounds.
West Chicago, no business, plenty of traffic.
I was going to mention, though, to the point about anonymity, that with that identity formation piece that we talked about with adolescence, that it can. That's one of the kind of tricky things, I think, for parents, is that anonymity and, using avatars and that type of thing can actually, for one, it can be a way to keep young people safe and to kind of protect them a little bit online, to not, and I know a lot of parents that don't, when their kids first get onto social media, they have them create an account that's not their real name, so that when they're applying to college or looking for a job or something, they can just kind of move over to something with their real name on it.
Yeah.
Pretty smart.
That's part of the training wheels process there.
Yeah. But there is, I wanted to say that with adults, we approach anonymity a very, particular. It's like we're trying to hide, who we really are or something like that. And with young people, it can be a little bit more kind of productive or helpful, with respect to kind of the identity formation stuff. So. Yeah,
and man, there's so much more that could be said. I can think about, is it viral bullying? Is that the terminology?
Yeah. So
you get people creating fake profiles and then just bullying people. That's part of the anonymity aspect, and so raising a generation of children in our new digital age is very important for creating healthy people to begin with. And having those controls, giving them training wheels. When is that's a great analogy, by the way. When would be a good time to take off the training wheels?
When they're 27. That's the honest answer. No, I think it depends. Kid to kid, kind of how mature they are. Even with my own nephews, I have one that's 11, one that's 7, and one who's 2. But between the 7 and 11-year-olds, there's different personalities, where I could see them kind of acting differently if they were to start, using social media or whatever. So I think a lot of it's kind of discerning it with the kids. But I guess around ideally before they go to college, you'd like them to have a couple of years where they're not under the strict supervision, but they're still, it's kind of like a safety net, that if there is some kind of a big screw up that you can talk with them about it. I'd say kind of ideally probably high school-ish, that kind of thing.
Nice. Art, this has been a helpful conversation. Thanks for sharing with us your research and the publication here too. Every Parent's Guide to Navigating Our Digital World. We'll be sure to put a link on our website so people can purchase the book, and Chris will even get a link up, I'm sure, to our live stream that's been going on. I apologize for any folks that have been commenting. I haven't been paying attention this episode. But Art, why don't you stick on the line? I want to chat with you maybe about a couple other things afterwards, so don't leave us yet. But thank you so much for coming on the program today.
My pleasure.
All right, well, that does it for the show. Next week, we have Ted Davis joining us. He will be talking about Galileo. There are a number of ideas, beliefs about Galileo, and the relationship with the controversy and the Catholic Church, the drama that all happened back a few centuries ago. Ted has studied Galileo, and he will be enlightening us on the truth. He'll be correcting some misconceptions that many people have, I know, about that period of time. in the apologetics world, it's sometimes an issue that gets brought up that, well, the Catholic Church, religion poisons everything, right? It hates science, and Christianity is opposed to science. Just look at what happened to Galileo. So that gets brought up. So next week should be an interesting episode for those that have had experiences like that in discussing the relationship between Christianity and science. And that's a number of talks and material that Ted himself has written on recently. In fact, that's how I met him at the Bradley Study Center a couple months ago now. And so looking forward to that interview next week. Okay, well, that does it for the program today. I'm grateful for the continued support of our patrons and the partnerships that we have with our sponsors. They are Defenders Media, Consult Kevin, The Sky Floor, Rethinking Hell, the Illinois Family Institute, Fox Restoration, and Nonprofit Megaphone. I want to thank our technical producer, Chris, for all the fine work that he does week in, week out. Thank you, Chris. And to our guest today, Art Bamford, who is a senior fellow at the Center for Media, Religion, and Culture at CU Boulder. Last but not least, I want to thank you for listening in and for striving for truth on faith, politics, and society.
You've been listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. This is a listener-supported program. For more resources, including past shows, visit veracityhill.com.